Everybody. My name is Alex Zucker. I am a translator, and together with Margaret Carson, is she still here? Yes, in the back. Serve as co-chair of the PEN America Translation Committee, and I'm also currently serving on the Board of Trustees at PEN America, so on behalf of the 4,000 members of PEN America, the trustees, and the staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 11th Annual PEN World Voices Festival of International Literature, co-founded by author Salman Rushdie and translator Esther Allen, one of our predecessors as chair of the Translation Committee. PEN is an organization of writers active in more than 100 countries. We are the only organization dedicated both to defending free expression and to celebrating literature. We work on behalf of jailed and threatened writers, speak out against censorship and surveillance, and offer provocative literary programming. The PEN America Translation Committee advocates on behalf of literary translators, working to foster a wider understanding of their art and offering professional resources for translators, such as the model contract. For translators, publishers, critics, bloggers, and others with an interest in international literature, you can visit us at pen.org/translation. For more information about PEN in general and details on other festival events, visit pen.org. Or visit the table outside or downstairs to learn about becoming a member, and you can receive a discounted membership if you join in person. I also want to say that there are books for sale right outside. I was reminded to say that. PEN is expanding its membership and activities now. Would love for you to be part of it, so please sign up for the newsletter, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. I'd like to thank the sponsors, supporters, and volunteers who make the PEN World Voices Festival possible. And thank you for being part of our audience. Thank you all for coming today. Enjoy the event. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sal Robinson, the moderator. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. So I think our mics are all on. I'm Sal Robinson, and I would like to thank you all very much for coming today. And before we go any farther, I'd also like to remind you to turn off your cell phones. If you get a call during the event, we will make you take it and humiliate you personally. Just to orient everyone, this is how the event will go. I'll give a brief introduction of our panelists, and then the five of us will have a conversation until about 4:15. And at that point, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. So get your questions ready. So without further ado, Nanama Chairmatan is the founder and managing editor, all the way over on my left, of AfriDiaspora.com, a blog dedicated to promoting literature from Africa and the diaspora, where she runs interviews with, features on, and fiction from some of the best and brightest young writers working today. She also runs the AfroLit Festival, and I'm really glad to see that PEN took her lead this year. As they say, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Tara Cheesman-Olmsted runs the blog Book Sexy Review, and she sums up the genesis of the blog on her blog in this wonderful way that I just wanted to share with you. She says, "I'm a literary matchmaker whose friends are tired of being set up. This wouldn't be a problem if they'd only read faster. Once they revolted, I was faced with the decision: lifetime banishment to the spam folders of my nearest and dearest, or start a blog. Thus, Book Sexy Review was born." Michael Orthoffer is the founder of the website The Complete Review and its Literary Saloon blog. He's also a member of the National Book Critics Circle and has served as a judge for the Best Translated Book Award, as well as the Austrian Cultural Forum's ACF Translation Prize. Just so that if you aren't familiar with his blog, just so you get a sense of the breadth of it and his reading, he has a What's New page on it that lists his most recent reviews, and here are some of the books on it. An incomplete list of things Michael has read recently. 2 books from the Lontar Modern Library of Indonesia series, a never-before-translated George Simenon novel, novels by Boubacar Boris Diop and Zak Meda, Cuban science fiction, Swedish dystopian mysteries, Georgian short stories, Jan Lianke's novel On the Great Leap Forward, and just for the hell of it, a work of French philosophy about the concepts of beginnings in Chinese thought and how our understanding of this is shaped by translation. And I'm sure that was just last week, right? And then Scott Esposito, to my immediate left, is the author of the book The End of Oulipo with Lauren Elkin. He's senior editor of the journal Two Lines, and he directs publicity for the publishers Two Lines Press and Deep Vellum. His writing has appeared in the Times Literary Supplement, the White Review, Book Forum, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and many other places. He runs the online magazine The Quarterly Conversation and the blog Conversational Reading. And just to give you a small taste of that, the most recent post on conversational reading is called The Knausgard Cometh, and you don't get any prizes for guessing what that is about. So I'd just like to start things off by having each of our panelists tell us a little bit about their blogs, how they came to start it, how long you've been running it, who contributes to it, what it covers, who it's for. And Scott, would you like to start?
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming, and thanks to Penn for hosting and putting this event together. This is really awesome, and it's just nice to see so many people interested in world lit. So my blog, God, I think I started it in 2004, which in like kind of internet terms was like ages and ages ago. Michael Orthofer is really like the godfather of all of this. He was doing it way before anyone knew there was an internet. But even 2004, blogs were still kind of new. Like only weird people had blogs, and you did it in your underwear in your basement and things like that. So this is true, and I started reading blogs probably around 2002, 2003. And really, the reason I was doing it was politics, like a lot of people who just really kind of hated what was going on in US politics, they were kind of collecting around these embryonic websites that now, are very recognized brands in terms of American politics, but were just kind of finding their energy then. And I think, I just really liked a lot of the political blogs I was reading. I was like commenting and participating in those communities. At some point I thought, I wonder if there's like literary equivalents of these. And then, I realized that there were, and that like I could actually contribute if I wanted to this conversation. So I just kind of started a blog, and it's just kind of been a part of my life ever since then. I'm pretty much the only contributor to my blog. Every now and then someone will say like, can I like write a post for you or something, and I'll put them in there, but it's pretty much just me. It's kind of gone through different manifestations. Like at one point I was writing a weekly column on it. At other points it's been like a lot of links and not a whole lot besides that. There have been interviews, there have been reviews. It's kind of changed with kind of my feelings about the internet changing or my time and energy changing. But it's always just been about literature, because I just want it to be kind of a place on the web where people can get just books and not have to worry about anything else that might be out there for them to consume.
I started my site, The Complete Review, not quite before the internet. The internet was already fairly well established. I started in 1999, which is a fair time ago. And basically the reason I did, became interested in what was available on the internet, and I saw that there were a lot of book reviews. People liked posting book reviews. So people have always apparently enjoyed, seeing the internet as a good place where you can get your opinions about books out. But one of the fascinating things was nobody was linking to other reviews of whatever book somebody was discussing. And so I thought that aggregating that would be a wonderful idea. And also, the internet suddenly gave you access to all this international media. So you not only had whatever your local hometown newspaper or the national magazines were, but suddenly you could also find book coverage from across the globe. And so the opportunity to link to that seemed to me wonderful as well. And so the Complete Review originally started as a book review site, and it was sort of an afterthought that I would add my own reviews of whatever the books were, but I decided, well, that makes the most sense. And so that is how it started out. And in 2002, I added the Literary Saloon, which is a daily weblog, which is basically, it links to the news of the day, the information of the day. And if I hear about interesting literary prizes, and again, the opportunity to get information from around the world was what I thought was so wonderful. And so basically, it is a very internationally oriented site and points to a lot of these, information from all across the world. And yeah, basically, it's remained remarkably unchanged in all this time, for better and for worse. But I enjoy doing it. There are now some 3,500 books under review at the site. And that's what I do.
Tara?
Well, I started my blog, Book Sexy Review, in 2009. And I really didn't get involved in translations and international literature till about 2011. And I think that was a friend of mine who is also a blogger referred to it as the high watermark of book bloggers. There just seemed to be so many of them, and as a way to differentiate myself, I decided to go into translations and international literature. And that was a year I think the second year I attended BEA, and it was this amazing experience because I would go through, and there were so many bloggers there, but no one was interested in the translations. And I'd walk up to a booth and I'd say, well, this is what I'm looking for. And people were happy. They had all these books they couldn't get rid of. Well, at the time, it was still a very small thing. And since then, the blog's been going strong. I've gotten involved with more of a community. I found people all over the world who are specifically interested in translations, and I try to keep it more on the literary side. I'm not a snarky reviewer. I come from a background of the New York Times, New York Review of Books, and that's basically it. I'm basically just interested in the journalistic form of book review, just brought over to the internet.
Great, thanks. Then Emma.
Hello, everyone. So I'm probably the newbie in the group. I started my blog in November 2013, so it's almost 2 years old. But to tell the story of my blog, which is afrodiaspora.com, I think I have to take it a few steps back. I'm from Ghana in West Africa. I was born there, and I moved to LA, Los Angeles, when I was 11. So in college, I started reading African literature. I mean, I've always been interested in it, but just very on the low level. So I was reading. I would go to a lot of readings. Fast forward 2013, early 2013, I went to a reading with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She was promoting Americana, and I just had this red light moment, or light bulb moment, if you will, that, you know what, I really want to start a blog. It was very inspirational. It was packed, and I just thought people want to know about this, and I want to write about it. So I started the blog, like I said, in October 2013, and it's been an amazing experience so far. What I focus on really is the young and emerging writers that are coming from Africa right now. Their genre is really going through a change. I think in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was sort of an older crowd, but now it's a lot of young and hungry writers that are 19, 20, 21, 22, and they're doing amazing work. And kind of, diverting and really kind of expanding what African literature is today. So I have a few of those writers from all over the continent that write for me. And yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you. So the thesis of this event is that bloggers and the blogosphere have been a key source for discussions of international literature in the US for at least the last 10 years. Much more so, actually, than traditional media outlets like the New York Times or the New York Review of Books. And I know that this is a slightly provocative thesis, and I just wondered if you think it's true or not, why or why not, and if you have some comments on that. And make sure to hold your mics close to your mouths, closer than you think you need to hold them.
At the risk of being provocative, I would say definitely it's true. I mean, it's obvious. I think that's one of the things about the translated lit world. People always kind of talk about why there isn't more coverage of these books in the media. I mean, it's just kind of taken as a given that there isn't, and it's more the question of why is this the case? Why does this feel off-putting to the people in the position to assign the review or write the review? What can we do to make these books more interesting to people? So I guess like the conversation kind of takes more of that ground, and I guess maybe something Tara was saying, how BEA, they just love to give you their books because you're the only one who wants them. I've had that experience too. That was one of the interesting things about just beginning having a blog. I had been blogging for a very short time when publishers like Dalkey Archive or New Directions would be more than happy to give me books, and I kind of felt like I was absolutely nobody, and it was very surprising that publishers like this would want to give me books. And maybe at some point down the line I made the connection, oh, they're giving me books because I actually care about what they're publishing, and this is not an experience that they often have. So I would definitely say that in the blogosphere there has been kind of a lot of interest for this subject and a community that's formed. And now it's been interesting to see a lot of those people kind of go on to have careers and actually get themselves in more mainstream positions where I feel like they've been in a position to change things in a way, or just kind of the collective conversation has kind of bubbled up a little bit. But maybe Michael Orthofor would talk a little bit about the New York Times. That's kind of like an infamous place, I think, in the translated lit world where they just seem so resistant to it. And I know that Michael, for a long time, would actually kind of like chronicle the dearth of translation in the Times.
Actually, that was well, first of all, I basically grew up in New York and reading the New York Times book review every Sunday, and so in 1970s, 80s, when there actually was a lot of coverage of foreign fiction, and I also think that more foreign fiction was being published. I think the 60s and 70s were sort of a high point, and then it went down, down, down through early 2000s, and the situation has now improved somewhat again. But anyway, so growing up, reading the New York Times Book Review, I could rely on it to cover at least the major international fiction. And then especially once I started the Complete Review, Sam Tannenhouse took over the New York Times Book Review. He became editor in around 2000 or so. And immediately there was a striking fall-off. And when I went to talk about the Complete Review at events like this, 10, 12 years ago, I would always bring a stack of New York Times book reviews with me, the most recent ones, and show people how far back I had to go to find a single mention of a book in translation, because there was absolutely no coverage there. And that was sort of, there really was a institutional problem there, and the situation has fortunately improved somewhat. I think it's improved somewhat elsewhere too. But the media, again, there is, for example, the problem that there is just too little review space in print right now. And so the internet is an obvious other place to have all of this. And when I started the Complete Review, of the first 1,000 books I reviewed, about 60% were English. But I saw how little fiction and translation, how little international literature was being covered. And so I've moved. That's one of the few things where I've actually made a conscious effort of what I review, and I've moved much more towards international literature because I saw the need for it. And but I think, in that sense, blogs and internet sites have definitely improved the situation. At least there's some coverage out there. It might not be readily accessible, or it might not find as large a readership, but it is out there at least.
I was just thinking about the New York Times as you were speaking, and I grew up on the New York Times, and the book review, and that's how I started out reading it. And now I don't read it anymore. It's, to me, not trying to be controversial, but to me, it's a publicity sales figures sheet now. I don't feel that the reviews are really in depth, or they're really going outside of as much the big publishers. And I think one of the things that is great about translated and international literature, but also is something that's constantly struggling against, is the people who are in the forefront of it are the small publishers. And these are the guys without the marketing budgets, and they're without, they don't have the big authors on their, we were talking about blurbs before, they don't have the big authors on their tally sheets that they can get the blurbs they need. So they needed bloggers. I mean, in the beginning, they needed us. I think now, actually, even in the last couple years, there's been a huge difference. I'm not in New York. I'm actually in one of those flyover states called Pennsylvania. And the other day, and I don't know if he stuck around, but the publisher of Europa, you might be very happy to hear that I was in a supermarket the other day in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Ferrante was on the shelf. And that is unbelievable in Pennsylvania. Yeah, it's a big deal. It really is. It's a big deal. And I think as more of these books get that kind of attention and that publicity, if you look at, 5 years ago, did anyone hear of Nordic literature? You know what I mean? It's this kind of, these crime fiction. Did anyone even know they wrote books over there? Let alone they were this like crime fiction hotbed. And I think things like Ferrante are going to open up this idea, that now that the numbers are behind and the sales figures are behind it, I think the big publishers are going to be all over it. And I think we're going to see more of that coverage, and I think we're already beginning to see more of that coverage. But I don't know if I totally answered your question, but I wanted to kind of put a positive thing that I think it's grown, it's becoming bigger, and as more of the bloggers are moving into more of a professional career, they're bringing that idea and that type of reviewing and that taste set to the major outlets. So I think it's a good thing.
Right. Well, I definitely agree with everything you're saying, Tara. I mean, I think one of the things that motivates me and motivated me to really begin my blog is because there's not enough of that anywhere else in main media. I mean, there's a little bit, but I get a lot of people that come up to me and say, yes, I want to read about African literature, but I don't know where to go or who to read. So one of my main purposes is really to inform, not just what's current, but also, what's come before. So I definitely make it a point to inform and to promote as much as we can. A lot of the publishers really that are publishing African literature now, both big publishers and small publishers, but still the publicity is very minimal. So I think as a blogger, it's very important for me to kind of really push as much as I can, and that's my kind of little bit contribution to promoting it and pushing it. But in terms of African literature itself, I think that over the past couple of years, because of the success of Chimamanda, Half of a Yellow Sun, because of the success of Novaila Bulawayo, she was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize. So I think that we are getting definitely, it's getting more mainstream. So I think there's been success, but I think there's still a lot more ways to go.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, a lot of things to talk about there. I wondered if we could talk a little bit about the initiatives that come out of blogging that are sort of post or pre or on top of blogging. And that run parallel to the official literary ecosystem. For instance, Tara, I know you were on the shadow jury for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. Nanama runs a literature festival, and I'm also thinking of things like the Typographical Era Translation Prize. And I just want to pose a question of how you think your blog interacts with the existing structures, not only reviewing structures, but also publishers, prizes, influencing them, criticizing them, denouncing them, pushing them to do better, all those possibilities. And whoever would like to take that incredibly large question.
Well, I mean, one thing, as I was listening to everyone talk about their own opinions about their blogs, definitely blogs are kind of like one part of this ecosystem that's kind of evolved. Definitely there's more kind of talk about independent and small press publishing, about translated literature. Like, I feel like there has been more of an impact made in kind of like in the last 10 years that I've been watching the book scene. And I say that in large part due to the fact that there's this like whole kind of apparatus that's kind of grown up around it. We have booksellers who are really dedicated to hand-selling books at their bookstores. You have bloggers who are really kind of dedicated to their beat. You have publishers who've come on the scene and gotten a whole lot of attention for what they're doing, and there are publicists and editors there who are very into certain kinds of books. And all these people, I kind of feel like, they all kind of had energy to start their own initiatives at some point. And as we've all kind of watched the way the internet communicates evolve and allow for more and more connectivity, those people have found one another. And I don't know, I feel like I've definitely watched this happen in, maybe like, since I started my blog in 2004. So I guess what I'm saying is, I've seen all of this coalesce, and I've seen people come together, and, this person with this resource can help this person with that resource, and, people are planning events, people are, taking on prize initiatives, all this stuff is happening now, and it is creating a lot of attention. So, I don't know, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is just, I see kind of blogs as just one part of that ecosystem that's kind of developed.
Yeah, I think there's definitely been, I think there have been sort of levels of critical mass which we've reached over the years, and so let's say 12 years ago when Scott was just starting out blogging, for example, it was a very small community of literary bloggers, for example. And now it's gotten so much bigger, and I think that has helped a lot. I sometimes worry that, like with the shadow juries and so on, which I think is a wonderful idea, but I worry that it's a closed circle. So I don't know if it's reaching enough outside. If we can draw enough people into these various initiatives. I mean, I think that's always. I mean, one of the problems you have as a blogger is how do you reach your audience? How do you find a new audience? How do you draw in more people? But I think, the more there are of these initiatives, the more opportunities there are. And I do think, I mean, we definitely have seen them grow much larger, and there really is sort of this critical mass of interest in, for example, international literature now, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, just a question in that. Do you check your stats? Do you see your stats rise, or do you...
Obsessively, but there's no correlation to anything.
Oh,
I mean, the most popular reviews, it tends to be school texts and so on. So it's very bizarre. There's no correlation to whatever is hot or not, or very rarely anyway.
I think Michael makes a very good point. I mean, you can really kind of see the way internet discourses silo themselves off. You're just using kind of the literary community as a case study, and it's almost like the flu. You can see, like, if you put a little piece of information into the system, the way it travels around, and each node that it's going to kind of hit upon, and what that node is going to push out to other nodes in the system. And I mean, if you kind of live and breathe this world, you see it happen all the time, and you do start to wonder, where exactly is this information going? And I think it's a very important question because for a lot of these books, like, we're kind of the people who are getting the advanced information. I mean, I say we, like bloggers, booksellers, book reviewers, they're kind of the people in the privileged position with regard to that information. And if it's to get to the public, those people have to do something with it for it to reach the public. I was reading this post that this hip hop artist had written, and he's a fairly famous rapper, and he's very well known and popular. And he was making the point that like, one of my main challenges whenever I have a new album is just letting my fans know that I have a new album. And I mean, that's the thing, I mean, you have to actually get that information out there. It's not an easy chore. So I try to be mindful of that and find ways to kind of push things that I want people to know about out into the world, but sometimes it can be hard, just given the way kind of the internet communicates information right now.
And just talking about the idea of initiatives and what you were with shadow juries, I know when I started blogging, and I think this is true for a lot of bloggers when they first start out, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I'm still not sure what I'm doing, but back then it was just beginning. And so there are a lot of blogs that have these kind of initiatives like Mr. Linky and things you can join into to learn how to do it. But as I've developed my own voice and grown with it, I've gone in a different direction. I think the shadow jury thing, I find it interesting too, because I actually, and I could be, if I'm wrong, correct me, but I think it actually started out because of the Man Booker Prize. I think people were, every year people are unhappy about something with the Man Booker Prize. And I think a big thing was a group of people started out and they did this shadow jury because they were going to say what they really thought the Man Booker Prize winner should be. And then people just have run with it. With international literature, I think it's fun because there's not as much publicity, so they get to read these books and they get to put them out there. But I think the initiatives are really more of a tool, a beginning point, but I don't think the successful blogs are based on those. I don't know if that answered your question.
Sure. Yeah.
So on initiatives, I mean, I started my African Literature Festival just because I felt like that's an event that I would like to attend, and no one else was doing it, Just to my earlier point, a lot of people were coming up to me and say, okay, the blog is great, but where can I go and see, so-and-so read or, things like that. I mean, I think we're lucky we're in New York, we get a few pass through. But I think it is all part of that whole ecosystem. My main goal is really to inform and to educate what this genre is about and to get people reading. And if putting on a festival is going to do that, I think that's wonderful. I mean, this festival, for instance, I've met plenty of writers and people that I love and admire, and it's been wonderful definitely meeting them and speaking to them about their work. So I think it's one of those things that it's an added bonus, and if it can happen, it's really wonderful, and it serves the public and the reader and the writer too. Actually, I was speaking to a few writers at the festival earlier in the weekend. They were amazed because when one of them was saying being a writer is a very lonely job. You're in your room, you're writing all day, and then you're publicizing the book. But then when you're actually out there meeting the people and hearing what they have to say about your work, it takes on a whole different kind of tone to it. So I think it serves us, the reading public, it serves the writer as well, and I think we need to do more of it.
And just to comment on something you were saying, I think some of the most successful initiatives I've seen, and maybe you guys can speak to this, is when they do, blogs get together to do a specific region, or Spanish Literature Month. And I think when you have that much going on in 1 month, where it's, because I think for individual bloggers, I mean, we're just like one voice trying to reach an audience, but when we kind of move together and we have a bunch of them speaking about the same thing, that's when really the information gets disseminated.
Mm-hmm. Do you hear from readers? Do people respond to you about your reviews, or I don't think there's a commenting function on most of your blogs. Yeah.
I definitely hear from my reviews. I get a lot of emails asking about, one feature that I recently started was a book of the month. And because in the beginning of my blog, I mean, it's a year and a half old, I was just kind of writing about what I wanted to write about and reading what things I wanted to read. And then I'd get a lot of emails like, what are you reading next month? Or can you recommend a book? So I think recommendations are big. So I was getting a lot of, where can I go meet this writer? So I think that's a big point. That's helped me kind of find my voice and what I'm doing with the blog. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely heard from my readers. I mean, there are comments on my blog. They can get me by email. I guess as the internet has provided more and more ways for people to give feedback, I guess I get comments in lots of different media now. Maybe the most common would be Twitter or Facebook, where, I mean, it's incredibly easy to give someone a very succinct message on how they've been doing. The emails, there's not as many emails as you would think. Every now and then I'll get one, but it's usually just publicists send me, books that are grossly inappropriate for my beat.
Great. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about the closed aspect of that literary ecosystem, are you ever tempted to put something false out in it and just see what happens?
I'm always tempted to screw with people's minds. The problem is not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I fell really substantially for last year's April Fool's hoax on the Paris Review website, where they had an exclusive interview with Thomas Pynchon, and I was like, yes! Thomas Pynchon's finally given an interview. And then somebody who was very kind to me told me to think about it again. And now I'd like to move on to talking a little bit about reviewing translated books. And I just want to pose the question of whether you, or how you handle that, whether you read translations differently from non-translations. I know you all mentioned the translators. Do you make a conscious effort to talk about the translation? Do you think that poses any problems, or are you good with that?
Wow, that's such a big question. We could just have a panel on that. I mean, I've been on that panel, but I mean, I think kind of the short answer is just you do have to look at it differently, but you have to kind of deal with the fact that often you don't have access to the original, either you don't have the language, or you don't have the time or the resources to get that book if you can read the language. I mean, there are ways that you can evaluate. I mean, definitely you can look at the quality of the prose, and you can choose to just comment on that regardless of whether it's an aspect of the original or of the translation. You can look at kind of the consistency of tone. I mean, and there are some things that kind of survive translation intact, like if a book has an interesting plot, the original book probably has a good plot too. You know, that's not going to change because someone's translating it in a certain way. So you can kind of look at those structural things that are going to survive the translation. In terms of discussing the translation, you know, that's often something that the venue that you're writing for has a certain opinion about. I guess if I'm writing for my blog, I can do as I wish. But you know, sometimes it's a little more pertinent to what you have to say about the book than the other, and it would feel strange to me to just kind of make a digression into the translation just for the sake of doing that. But if there is kind of some pertinence, I mean, definitely it's something I think it's worth discussing.
So yeah, so not the like lucidly translated by.
Although I mean you kind of shy away from that, but a lot of translators tell me that, you know, I would rather have that than nothing.
Yeah, I'm unfortunate. I'm terrible at reviewing the translation aspect of translation, and so I tend to review just the book as is. And I mean, I think some aspects of the translation are mentioned or discussed in descriptions of how the prose works. But I tend to much too easily fall into the nitpicking, you know, very, very detailed oriented, which really doesn't serve much of a purpose. I do on the site sometimes, where possible, review multiple translations of the same book. So that's usually only possible with classical texts because relatively few modern texts have multiple translations. But I do, and there I will make an effort to compare the translations. And I also review a lot of bilingual editions, which I also think is very interesting because there you have the original text. The reader has the original text. And I think that makes for a different reading experience anyway, regardless, even if you're not familiar with the language. And so I think translation comes up much more in reviews of those kind of editions.
Sure. I find it so impressive that you do multiple translations and compare, because that must take a lot of work. Just going through.
Yeah, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, it sure did. So I'm a bit of a panel junkie, and last year I was at a panel with Mikhail Shishkin, and he was talking. We actually get a move.
I think we have two of his publishers in the house.
He was actually discussing Maidenhair, and one of the things it was a very interesting panel because it was held by it was basically asking the authors what they thought of the reviewers who reviewed their books. And it was obvious it was obviously the moderator was hoping that the authors would say, yes, it's an art form and it's a very important thing, and they really weren't interested in saying that. But one thing when he was talking about the translation was he said it's not his book. He said it's a different book now. It's not completely the book I've written, and I thought that was really interesting, and it's kind of the way I've always approached translation. Just going back a little farther, I have an art school background. I went to the New York School of Visual Arts, and there's filmmakers there, and so I look at translations as a collaboration between the, Edith Grossman could probably have translated 50 Shades of Grey, and it would have been beautiful. I mean, I just think she's an incredible translator, and I think she brings that to all her books. And it seems to me that sometimes with translations, people want, this idea that it has to be the original book. It just becomes dominant, and I think actually I kind of appreciate, and I think it's more interesting that it is a translation, that it is two people bringing things to the book. And in some books, like Scott was saying, it doesn't matter as much. I mean, if you're reading something with a straightforward plot, beginning to end, like an American novel where, it's mostly, the translation, they're just basically making it look good and sticking with the plot narrative. But when you get into something like French literature, and I always pronounce this wrong, but Aleppo, the language is very important. We were talking about Sphinx. Right now, I'm getting ready to write a review on that, and I am looking for everything I can find by the translator, because just the act of her translating that is fascinating. It's a game that she's playing with the author, and that's how I approach it. I know there's a school of thought that if you're going to translate, you have to be able to translate from the original language. You have to understand the original language, or else you're not being true to the book. But the reality is, most of my readers, if they could read the original language, they wouldn't need me. And that really the original language, and obviously not to minimize the author's part, because it sounds like I am, but it's not. All that's ever going to matter to them is going to be the book in the English form. Mm-hmm. And so my review of the book in the English form is all that's really going to matter to them.
Sure. And the book is Sphinx by Anne Garetta.
Yes, and do you have it on the shelves? Yeah. Oh, great book. It's going to win awards this year. I have no doubt in my mind.
I was just going to say, I haven't had the great honor of translating a book yet, but I'm sure it's in the cards.
Okay, yeah. Great. Well, I think I just have one last question, and then we'll open things up to the audience. And I just wanted to ask, what are basically for book recommendations, or what are some discoveries you've made in blogging, or something that's going on in the international literary scene that you think is really exciting? And I know that I personally have shared with Michael the discovery of Leg Over Leg. That's how I found, it was through your blog that I found out about it. So this is an incredible book, multiple books. So yeah, is there anything that you've seen recently that you've just been really impressed by? It doesn't have to be one thing. It can be multiple things.
And you could promote your own books.
Moment of reflection.
Well, I could start. Basically, I go through so many books, and actually I've also recently finished Sphinx by Anne Garetta, which I recommend highly, so that's certainly one of them.
Emma Ramadan.
There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you for but I think one of the things which is most noticeable to me is these small publishers who have relatively small lists, like Deep Vellum, which brought out Sphinx, Two Lines Press, which Scott is also associated with, Open Letter, and you can really rely on these publishers, and I think it's wonderful to just fall into those, and you see the imprint and just go with that. And the other thing I would recommend, you mentioned I've recently reviewed 2 books from the Modern Library of Indonesia, which is actually, they're published by a publishing house called Lontar, which is based in Indonesia, but through the wonders of print on demand now, they're relatively affordably available in the United States as well. And it's just fascinating to see these books which no one here has ever heard of or come across. And they really give a wonderful insight into a country, for example. Similarly, Dalkey Archive Press, for example, now has a Georgian literature series. So you get literature from Georgia, which I had never you just couldn't find these things. And so I would encourage you, or also the Leg Over Leg is in the Library of Arabic Literature from NYU Press. I really encourage people to seek out these specialized series, which are often absolutely wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Yeah, I would have to recommend the new Silvino Campo book from New York Review Classics, Thus Were Their Faces, translated by Daniel Balderston. She's a writer. She was very much with the circle of Borges and Adolfo Bioy Casares. She and Bioy were married. And she's, even in Argentina, is always kind of regarded as, the genius who no one reads, which is a bit of exaggeration, but she's never really had quite the status of Borges and Bioy in that country or in this one. And so New York Review has kind of done, they took a book that had been translated in 1988, and they added a whole bunch of other stories from other parts of her career to that, and produced something that's really kind of sweeping. I think it's maybe like 350 pages long, just really kind of gets the sweep of her career, which was maybe 40 years long. And she's a very original author. Her stories are very much of the milieu of Borges and Bioy, but they're completely original within it. I mean, she has her own voice. She does her own things in her own perspective, kind of from within that context. And I think Daniel Balderston did a fantastic job translating those into English. You know, they were well selected. It's a well curated volume. And the New York Review also did a volume of her poetry. She's probably better known in Argentina as a poet than as a fiction writer, and the poetry is very good as well. So I would, this is really kind of her first time in the English language with a very major, very successful publisher. And I feel like now is the time for her books to really kind of take on in this context.
Great, thank you.
There's a new book it's not quite out yet, and to be honest, I can't remember the full title. I'm like a bookseller's worst nightmare. But I believe it's the Meursault trial, or the Meursault. Thank you, the Meursault investigation. It's coming out from Other Press, and it's an Algerian book, and basically what it is it's taking The Stranger, and it's looking at it from the side of the murdered Algerian. His brother's narrating it. And I think especially today, with the way the world is, I think books like that are important, where we're suddenly seeing things from a different perspective than how we've always been taught to see it. And it's wonderful. It's really fantastic. It's very powerful. It's very angry. Another book, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of Mexico right now. I'm going to go back a little bit because I don't think, Villalobos?
Yeah.
Down the Rabbit Hole, and he just came out with one, Tortilla something. Thank you, Quesadillas. I'm terrible with names, so I'm nervous. And those were fantastic, and they're fun, and they're playful, and I think sometimes we think of translated literature as heavy, that it all has to be incredibly literary, and these are books that are just fun to read, and they're novellas, they're short, and they're funny. And we just saw Alain Mabankou last night, and he's another one of those authors. He actually is just getting, he was listed for the Man Booker International Prize, and his stuff is just joyful. It's so funny, and it's happy, and it's taking, we were just talking before, it's taking the, African literature now, a lot of it is about diaspora, and that's what he's looking at. So not only is he looking at the Congo, but he's looking at being Congolese in France. And I believe his latest book is Letter to Jimmy, dealing with James Baldwin and his relationship to James Baldwin. And I wouldn't recommend starting there, because that's a little bit more, philosophical. And I think his fiction is just much happier. And the last one, because I always mention him, is Cesar Era. Probably everyone here has read him, and if they haven't, they should. His books are just beautiful. They're challenging, they're interesting, they're vivid, and he also is on the Man Booker International Prize.
Great, thanks so much. Nanama?
So I have two recommendations. My first one is called The Fisherman, by a young Nigerian man called Chigozie Ibioma. He's 28 years old, but I feel like he's 98 years old. His book is filled with so much spirit. It's a story, and I won't give it away, but I highly recommend it. It's a story of four brothers in Nigeria, in a small town in Nigeria in the 1990s. And the New York Times review actually reviewed this one and said that he's the heir to Chinua Achebe, which is a huge undertaking. So it's very epic and grand. And even though it's a story of four brothers in Nigeria, it's really a story of four brothers anywhere, and what they go through. So I highly recommend that. And then my other recommendation is We Need New Names by Novailet Bulawayo. So Novailet is from Zimbabwe, and she talks about the story is about these young kids, they're 10, 11, 12, and sort of, also 1990s, but 1990s Zimbabwe and East Africa and everything that they're going through. So those were my recommendations. And actually, The Fisherman, back to The Fisherman, it came out in the UK. It just came out in the US, but it was out in the UK last year, and it's been translated into 12 languages. So I smell a man booker for him. It's really quite. It's probably the best novel I read in 5 years. It's great.
Great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Tara, go for it.
I just feel, since we're talking about translation, it wouldn't be fair not to mention translators. And I won't mention specific books, but there are some go-to translators that I look at. We were just talking about Jordan Stump. Also, Chris Andrews is fabulous. Heather Cleary does Sergio Chechvek, and I think Margaret has a book coming out in the future. Once you get, Sergio Chechvek is great. If you, and that's something, if you start, the more you read translations, the more you recognize the names, and you find that specific translators are the ones you want to read. So.
Yeah. So you use translators as a guide as well as houses and areas.
Definitely.
Great. That's good to hear. So are there any questions from the audience? Raise your hand, and I think that somebody might bring you a mic. Is there a mic?
I need to borrow one.
Okay. I will bring you a mic, as a matter of fact.
Thank you, Sal. Hi, thank you all. And Tara, thank you very much for that shout out as a translator. I appreciate that. It's something to aspire to. I guess my question is, as bloggers, it's kind of going back to sort of the nitty gritty, is where do you get your material that you're blogging about? How much of it are you seeking out yourself as you finding these needles in haystacks, and how much of it is being provided to you by these various outlets and initiatives that you're talking about? So.
Well, I could start with that. I do a lot of seeking out on my own, actually. I look for writers on Facebook. I look for them on Twitter. These are writers that I'm interested in, people that I've read their works and I love their work, and I've always wanted to interview them or talk to them about their work. So I do a lot of that. In terms of getting work from publicists, for me, that just recently started happening. And I'm very picky about that because I don't want to be part of some sort of big machine. I think the beauty of being a blogger is having that independence. So for me, I think now I get a lot of review this, write about this, interview. So, but I think I have to have a connection with connection with the writer and what they're writing about. But to answer your question, mostly I do a lot of seeking out on my own.
Yeah.
Oh no, go.
As people have mentioned, there are certain publishers, there are certain translators who I'm always kind of curious what they're working on or what they're putting out in the world. So, that's a lot of kind of me seeking out stuff. I'll just kind of see what's happening in those necks of the woods. There are very few very, very trusted people who I will take their word extremely seriously and investigate kind of whatever they tell me is worth taking a look at. So that's, I guess, where a lot of the information is being fed to me. In terms of publicists and things like that, I'm always happy to kind of take looks at books, and people send me books all the time. There are many, many books kind of in that stack, so it's hard to give each one really kind of in-depth look, but sometimes very good things come out of there. I will say I've been a part of the Best Translated Book Award for a very long time, and each year you're forced to read a lot of books you wouldn't read otherwise. So there are always discoveries there, and in talking with the other judges, there are always kind of things that come to light that way. But that would be a very special circumstance, judging an award.
Basically, whatever you can get your hands on. I read a lot of reviews. I follow blogs. I listen to podcasts. If I can't find an interview with the translator, I'll find the translator. Going back to Jordan Stump, I put out a call out on Twitter. Does anyone know where I can find this man? And like a week later, I got, you were looking for me? And I think that's really important for what we do because we need that information, that background. I love translator notes. They're awesome. So basically, yeah. And another thing is, I think the UK is a little bit ahead of us on a lot of books. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, or I follow a lot of blogs. For a while I was subscribing to Time Literary Supplement, so I could see what was coming out over there before it came out over here. I don't know if this is purely legal, but I will go on to UK websites where I can purchase books and bring them over here before they get here. So yeah, basically wherever you can find the information.
We won't tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, the first review copies I ever got from a publisher were from a UK publisher, which I requested from in 1999. So they were actually more receptive than the first American publishers. And yeah, I think one of the wonderful things about having a blog is that it's sort of your own fiefdom, your own domain, and you can really decide what you're going to do. So you can tune out the publicist forcing the latest hot book on you, because that if it doesn't interest you, you don't have to bother with it. And fortunately, enough publishers whose books I appreciate send me their books constantly, so I have that constant stream of material. And as far as like literary news and so on, it's also, again, I seek out what's of interest to me. The Literary Saloon is basically, it's a link collection of links that are of literary news that's of interest to me. And I'm glad that other people seem to enjoy it as well. But basically, it's just a useful way for me to collect this information.
Actually, one thing that I wanted to add quickly was that I read a lot of literary magazines. On my beat, if you will, in the African literature scene, there are a few really, really great literary journals that kind of are on the beat and really kind of know and happen to just pick out this new and emerging writers, which I'm one of the things I'm really focused on. So they're really helpful, actually. And if I may list a few, there's two in particular. There's one based in Nigeria called Sarabak, which is really great, or even Granta also, you know. So yeah, so I just want to add a literary journals are another great kind of source for me as well.
Thank you. So I heard earlier on in the panel, oh, hi. I heard earlier on in the panel, some of you shared feeling like you didn't know where the information was going. I think that was you. And I wanted to hear you guys talk a little bit more about that, and particularly what use you want the information that you're continuing to share to have. Some of you have been blogging for 10 years or a little longer. So how does the use of the material or information that you're sharing change? And what is your responsibility to your audience to evolve or grow their mindsets as well, as you continue to think about the use that your information will have? So just speak a little bit about that, please.
Well, I know for me, I don't feel too much of a responsibility to the audience. I do want to provide as much information as possible about whatever book I'm covering. And so I do cover a lot of books which actually don't get much review coverage. And also sort of books from all across the world. As I mentioned, for example, this Modern Library of Indonesia series, which nobody has reviewed because nobody reviews these Indonesian books here. And there's some Indonesian blogs which have reviewed them, but that's not of much use to English readers. But basically, I just want to make the information available and basically cover as much literature that's of interest to me, share that with readers. And readers seem to like it. My site has a very international readership, which I think is, which I appreciate and which I think is fascinating. It really doesn't have a mainly American readership, but it finds every day readers from absolutely every corner of the world. So.
I think for me, when I alluded to it earlier, but one of my main goals is really to inform and educate. So I don't know if I look at it as a responsibility so much as I just want to inform and educate people about the genre, and that's it, you know? So I definitely, in terms of responsibility, I definitely try to kind of keep a balanced view, you know, in terms of the people that we interview, and, you know, people that really tell stories about a complete picture of stories, you know? So, yeah, that's inform, educate, promote in our own little way.
I would kind of preface my remarks by saying that I feel like there are definitely different audiences for any given thing that I do, whether it's like a review or a blog or whatever. And so different audiences will find different pieces of information that I'm putting out into the world worthwhile. You know, maybe if it's a publisher, that person will be more interested in books that haven't actually been published in English yet. If it's just someone who's more on the level of an everyday reader, that person will want more of an evaluation of a book. So, you know, I mean, there are different kinds of posts for different kinds of people. When I'm being a critic, I feel like the most important thing is always to very accurately represent what it is about a book that is, you know, wholly unique to that book insofar as that book is unique, and to really put that into the review and embody that for someone so they can know what this book is about. And then the other thing I try to do is to you know, then critique that. You know, is that interesting? Is that worthwhile? Has that been successfully achieved? Those sorts of things. And just, you know, just give someone a very deep impression of what this book is and my feelings about it. In terms of the stuff that I choose to cover, I don't want to cover things that have been already covered a lot unless I feel I have something original to contribute to the conversation about them. I mean, I feel like certain books that have been very, very well covered in the blogosphere, I'm a little bit late to, and maybe I'll just let them pass with a mention or something just to register that I think this is interesting. But I won't say much more because I just don't have anything to add to that. I'd much rather be the first one to talk about something or to talk about something that's not being covered. I feel like that's probably serving the audience a lot better.
Keep having your hands up.
Thank you. Hi, just following up on the previous panel. Are you aware of the gender bias in book reviewing of translations? And would you do anything in your reviewing practice to correct that if you are?
Well, I'm very aware of it. I've actually kept statistics for a long time, and shamefully, my only 15% of the books I review are by female authors, and the percentage by female translators I think is considerably higher, but not that much. But one of the problems is that so much more is translated of male-written literature than by women. And I do find it very frustrating. I'm uncomfortable sort of trying to fix that by, you know, just reading women for a month or just reading women translators for a month. I don't think that's really a sort of long-term solution. It's sort of an artificial way of going about it. But I do find it immensely frustrating, even as I'm, you know, very embarrassed by how terrible the statistics at my own site are.
Last year I became aware of it. There was a blogger who blogged under the name Biblibio, and she started a Women's in Translation Month. She started a hashtag, and her and I were acquaintances, and we talked about it a little bit as she was getting ready to start that whole initiative. And it was interesting because I hadn't realized the discrepancy. She did what you did, and I don't know who was here for the previous panel, but she basically took the 3% translation database and broke it down by the numbers. And unilaterally, she found a third were women authors in translation. And it was interesting because after she pointed that out, I went through my bookshelves and I found a third of women in translation. And one thing I was thinking of bringing up at the last panel, but I didn't, there was a statistic of Amazon Crossing, that they basically had the best balance of men to women authors. And I'm curious about that because they do it by number. From what I know, they do it by sales figures. They choose what they're going to translate and what they're going to publish. And they also do it by sales figures and I just lost my train of thought. Genre. They publish a lot of genre. And it made me wonder if women authors are more accepted in genre books and less accepted as literary authors. And most translation publishing houses are small presses that lean more towards literary. And I feel bad because I don't want to throw the gauntlet down because I think small publishing houses with translations have a uphill battle on their own. But I believe if the books were published, they would be reviewed more. And I think the discrepancy starts in what we're getting out there. And once that basically changes a little bit, the gentleman from Tin House made a good point. He looked back and he saw where the disparity was, and he worked to fix it. And I think that's where it starts.
Anyone else want to comment?
I have a lot of different ventures related to the world of literature, and I try to have gender balance in all of those. I mean, I do an event series, and I try to kind of keep the authors that I'm featuring balanced. I try to balance what I'm reading and what I'm reviewing. But I think, Tara's point is very well taken. You're working with gross imbalances that already exist in the system, and sometimes those make it very difficult. If you're restricting yourself strictly to the world of translated literature, it becomes a lot harder to then have that balance because it's just so unbalanced in terms of what's available to you. I feel I'm very supportive of a lot of the ventures. Joanna Walsh is my friend, and I support her Read Women campaign, and I'm definitely participatory in these things. But I feel like part of the answer is for you yourself, if you feel it's important to begin to publish and translate these people, and not just to say there's an imbalance here and this should be corrected, but to found a publishing house or to found a journal and do things of that nature as well.
More questions?
I've got a question for Nanam in particular. I've never heard before a literature festival described as sort of a spin-off of a blog. I think of it as something, that's put together with enormous effort by organizations, so you've clearly pulled off this enormous thing. Can you say just a couple words about how that came about?
Sure. It nearly killed me doing it, if I can be honest. It's the truth. Let's see, the festival. I felt like, and this was in 2003 when I first did it, and end of the year again this year, but I just felt like I couldn't go and meet the writers that I wanted to meet anywhere else. No one was really doing an African literature festival. Definitely not in the United States, and believe me, I did look. In Africa, there's smaller festivals in South Africa and Kenya and Nigeria and in Ghana, my own country. But I wanted to do it because, like I said, I really kind of wanted a gathering place of these minds and really kind of talk about the genre, what's going on, and the stories that they were telling. So what I did was I kind of came up with a plan. I have to say I partnered with the Brooklyn Public Library. That's where it was held, and they were very helpful in the way of giving me the space. But it was me and my web developer and my intern, and we did it. It took us 6 months, and it was a lot of late nights. And I have a full-time job. I work for a hedge fund. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it was a labor of love, and I learned a lot, and I grew a lot as a person. And it was nice. I have to say I met one of the writers at the literary festival is actually here in Nana Peru. I'm gonna shout you out. She's over there. So Nana Peru was there. She's part of the Africa 39, which is a list of the best up and coming African writers. She was there with me, and she was very supportive. So it was definitely a community, I have to say, that helped me put it on. Thank you for asking.
More questions? Other questions?
I come from a minor language and minor literature from Bulgaria, and I'm a literary critic at the same time. And I was wondering, that's my very much like pragmatic question. Listening to you, you've been talking a lot about translation and translators. And I was wondering to what extent you actually need and to what extent it happened in your own experience to try to find a local review before going into your business of reading the translation and after that doing your work as bloggers and obviously literary critics. And to what extent you believe that it's not only the different language that is in question, but also the whole entire world of quite complex and unknown and unfathomable foreign reality that is in question here, and that could be clarified by a local critique. I know that it could sound provocative, but my point is that you should be maybe aware, and maybe you are, I'm curious to what extent it is a fact, that you are a part of this normalization and globalization of minor literatures and minor languages. Because obviously the very fact that they are translated into English and presented, even if it is done in a very positive way by your work, it is an act of taming and domesticating of this literature.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very, very important question. I would say for anyone interested in that question, Tim Parks has just published a book called Where I'm Reading From, and he actually talks a lot about exactly that question and what kind of books manage to make it out of the so-called minor literatures versus what books don't. And I think it has a lot to do with what translates into a broader context, what can be read outside of its original context versus what can, and those sorts of things. In terms of reviews and that sort of thing, I run a journal. I know a lot of other people up here, or maybe in the audience, are involved with that sort of thing. We do make efforts to find people with understandings of that scene to write about the book, because they can always write better about it and key in on things that other people are not aware of. As a critic, if I want to review a book, I can educate myself. I can talk to the translator. I can find out things like that. But sometimes you do have to confront the reality that I'm not Bulgarian or whatever, and there are going to be certain things that get missed. I guess I would take that as part of kind of the journey of a book from one context to another, and I do think that new things can be discovered in that new context that didn't exist in the prior one, so there is a little bit of feedback in that system. But I think that even though the book may be a little bit normalized in its way to the United States, it still comes to this country as a very foreign object, and that is putting a lot of kind of new ideas and new energy into the system. So I tend to look at it as a net gain instead of a loss.
I agree with everything Scott said. I think we all do a lot of research. I think of the translations as a door. It's opening a door into another country's culture, into their history that I might never be. I'm not going to travel around the world. I'm not going to see every country. A good example would be Mahmoud Dalatabadi's The Colonel. That opened my eyes to the history of the country he was writing from and of the culture of the people. I understand your concern, and I think it's an excellent question. But unless the Bulgarian novels are translated into other languages, unfortunately, they exist in a bubble, and it's actually cutting the rest of the world off and not sharing that information and that talent and that gift and that culture. So it's kind of it's a devil's bargain. I think the concern Tim Parks expresses is the fact that this homogenizing of world literature, this idea that everyone now wants to do a best-selling American novel. Everyone's tailoring the novels towards that. But the reality is that's a very pessimistic and negative view, because there's still authors in different countries who take a great amount of pride in their work, and they want to write the best possible book they can in the language they can, and that's going to continue. I hope that answers your question.
Great. Yes, we have a gentleman right here who's been very patient.
Well, I just picked this up because I know I've been waving my hand, but actually your question was similar to mine, but I actually was going to come at it from the flip side. I'm very interested in international literature, and that means, incidentally, I'm interested in translated literature, but I'm really wondering from a reader's point of view. a greedy reader trying to read as much as possible, what is the future of the whole Tower of Babel of, hundreds of languages? And I'm of course understand the cultural richness, and for instance, some people here may have seen the television series that Bob Holman did about disappearing languages, and I understand both sides of it, that it's a tragedy for smaller local languages to become globalized. At the same time, if you're a Bulgarian writer, you are also a world writer. Must you be a Bulgarian writer, or is there sometimes a good reason to bust out of your language and try to reach the world? And I know this is a gigantic question, a very heavy question, so there it is.
It was worth the wait.
Thank you.
I'd like to hear you answer this because I just learned yesterday at that panel that there are so many African languages. Mabanku was saying he speaks 7?
He speaks 7.
And outside the countries, are they spoken fluently?
Right. So to talk about Mabanku a little bit. So he's from the Congo, and the Congo has 42 languages. He speaks 7, but he writes in French, because French is the official language of the Congo. And so he writes in French, and his books recently have been translated into English. And really, I think that is the case. I'm a little bit ambivalent about this, because on one hand, I feel like, and I'm probably being controversial when I say this, but I really feel that if you publish in English and French, if you write in English and French, yes, you'll get published. If you write in another, taking Africa, for instance, if you write in an indigenous language, you won't get published. And really, that's the way it is. Should publishers be publishing and looking into publishing? Yes, they should, but are they going to? I don't think so. Because at the end of the day, I feel like publishing is a business, and it's all about economics. And I know I'm probably veering off a different path, but the point I'm trying to make is that I think it really, I appreciate, for instance, Archipelago books. I love them. I love the things that they do. And they make a huge effort to really translate a lot of North African and really different kinds of writers into English. And that's how I feel like that's how I get my fill, if you will. In terms of the future, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I hope that bloggers, being that we're independent, can kind of be on the forefront and then push for it and review and translate and really kind of put the word out there. Are publishers going to do it? I don't know. And that's my honest answer.
Well, I think the flood is going to just increase dramatically. I think it's going to become much bigger. And I'm actually on the one hand very optimistic about, for example, African indigenous languages, that I think the technological breakthroughs will make it economical to print on demand, for example, in African languages. And you already have the wonderful African Books Collective, which is a huge number of African publishers, and whatever they publish locally, you can basically get here, and it's basically a print-on-demand shop, but they're perfectly normal books, and they publish a limited number translated from indigenous languages. But I think that's an area where we will definitely see a lot of growth. But the problem, of course, with the flood is how do you deal with the flood? And so you have these different gatekeepers, and in some cases, for example, small publishers right now are decent gatekeepers of fiction and translation. You can rely when you buy a book from Dalkey Archive Press, you pretty much know what you're getting yourself into. And actually one of the concerns I have with my site is that I realize that I'm acting as a gatekeeper. By making my selection, I'm limiting sort of what I'm pointing people to. And it sort of tears me apart because there's so many things I would like to make people aware of, but which I just don't have the time and resources to. And so I don't know how that will happen in the future, but I think I'm very optimistic that, and I love the idea of just more being out there. I think it's a wonderful thing to have as many books as possible, and we'll figure it out later, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, so much of that question is just way beyond my pay grade, but I would say kind of if what Michael's saying is true, and there is really a flood of stuff because the internet enables these micro communities to actually produce their works, I think it's valuable for that to occur. Just for there to be a record of that having happened, and for that to be preserved and printed in some way, because the fact is that a lot of these languages are disappearing, and there's kind of an epidemic of it. So I think that's a very valuable thing, even if the audience is very small, as would need be the case if there's so many books kind of coming out of these contexts. I would just add to that, having worked in translation for a long time and seeing what the translator does and understanding everything that goes into that act, different languages see the world differently, and each language really is kind of its own thing. And I think there's a lot of value to people continuing to write in those and produce things that can only be put into those languages.
Great. Are there other questions? Yes, in the back.
Thanks everyone for the kind words about Deep Vellum on that panel. I am Will of Deep. I'm Will of Deep Vellum. I wanted to say about minority languages real quick is that there is a couple publishers that are starting to address this phoneme media. Their publisher is this guy David Shook, and he studied minority and endangered languages at the University of Oklahoma, which is a major. That's a really amazing thing. And so if you are interested in this question, look into programs like this. And anyhow, he has books from the Zapotec Isthmus languages of Mexico. He has a book coming out from the Uyghur language. And Restless Books is doing a book from Uzbek, I believe. So, there are publishers who are starting to get into this, but I think it is because of the internet that people, it's all kind of possible now, but then also programs like Oklahoma's. So that's pretty cool stuff just to be aware of. So it's starting to happen. But then I wanted to say about blogging and stuff that Deep Vellum was started because of blogs. So once upon a time, I was reading Russian literature and asking, why isn't more contemporary Russian literature published in English? And I was encouraged to translate a novel, to do something about it. And so then I started researching, who would possibly publish this, and learned all the numbers. And so I read the 3% blog of Chad. I read the complete review, as well as Quarterly Conversation by Scott. I read, the complete review. I read the Quarterly Conversation and Conversational Reading. I read the complete review in the Literary Saloon, and then all the other blogs. And it was this community of people who were sharing resources and ideas. And Chad saying, hey, if you care about this stuff, start your own press, made me go, what if I actually started my own press to do something about this? And so it was because of that inspiration, though, within the whole community of people that have actually made it all possible to get there. And so the question that comes out of this is as bloggers who blog about world literature broadly, from Africa, every continent, all the languages, minority, colonial, majority, whatever, how do you guys communicate with each other? Aside, I know you're friends with Joanna Walsh, everyone out there kind of is, how can you continue to build the readership? Because one of the problems that we have is we have a really sweet translation community going, and we all kind of know each other, but how can we get your average Joe out on the street here outside that doesn't know Albertine is in here to come in and buy French books? And then how can we get your average Joe out in Dallas, where I live, to continue buying the books that we all love so much, so that we can actually make this whole ecosystem grow and live on forever? Do you have any ideas about the future that way?
I think one of the best answers to that question is events. And I think you starting a festival is a really, really big thing. In my experience, events are the way to really get coverage for books outside of whatever kind of context they're going to be covered in, and just get people kind of excited about things. I kind of hate the literary celebrity aspect of the publishing business, but the fact is that can drag in people. You have 200, 300 people going to see Karl of Knausgaard. Those people aren't all translation insiders. So I do think, kind of getting outside of traditional publishing practices and doing things like events, creating things on the scene, creating publishers where that sort of thing never really existed, just kind of surprising people that those things exist in their neighborhood. I think that's really the key in my experience.
Okay, so I think that was our last question. I just want to thank you. I want to thank you with the microphone. I want to thank you all very, very much for coming today, this afternoon. That was great. And please join me in thanking Albertine, PEN, the PEN Translation Committee, and our wonderful panelists.